What's going to be the message from the White House?
Well, I think you're going to see the president reiterate his statement from last night, which was pretty extraordinary. I mean, it was one of those real sit up and take notice moments when the president essentially rebukes an ally in such strong terms. So, I mean, there are a couple things going on here. One is the fact that the president obviously wants to condemn the killing of 7 people, humanitarian aid workers. World Central Kitchen says this was a deliberate strike by Israel, though Israel has denied that. Obviously, there's a ton of blowback on the president for continuing to offer essentially unallied support for Israel. So what you're seeing is a president who's really trying to balance condemnation against this horrific strike, but also the fact that the U.S. is going to keep on supporting Israel.
Well, you mentioned that World Central Kitchen is maintaining that this was intentional, despite the Biden administration suggesting that there is no evidence to suggest that. Jose Andres, of course, the founder and famed chef, gave an interview to Reuters in which he said this is not just a bad luck situation where, oops, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place. He went on to say the U.S. must do more to tell Prime Minister Netanyahu this war needs to end now. The difficulty is ending the war now may leave Hamas as a threat to Israel. And therein lies the rub for not just the Biden administration, but the Netanyahu government as well.
Right. And that's what you're seeing. I expect they'll talk about tomorrow. We should make clear, as you said at the top, Israel has vehemently denied that this was an intentional strike, and it would seem to go against all sorts of sort of ideas about what they have in terms of how they're prosecuting this war. But this is just a struggle we continue to see from the Biden administration. They have said, the president has said, listen, there are essentially no red lines with Israel. We are not going to condition military aid. We are going to keep up our support. We are going to make sure they can prosecute this war against Hamas. They have every right to do that. But then you have a succession of actions by Israel that keeps putting more and more pressure on President Biden and forces him to respond. The question I'm really looking for is, okay, what now? I mean, if you have another one of these attacks, you have starvation in Gaza. At what point does the president say things have to change here? We have to exert leverage on Israel in a much more meaningful way. And so far, we just haven't seen that.
This is happening as the White House continues to call on the House to act on the supplemental emergency funding request for not just Israel, but also Ukraine. Both of these have become more complex over time, and lawmakers are going to return to this next week. Speaker Johnson has some very difficult decisions to make here, doesn't he?
He does. And, he's trying to tie this to a lot of different ideas. Or maybe there's a way out of this where he can appeal to the real conservative base the conservatives in Congress who oppose the idea of Ukraine aid. I mean, it is this extraordinary situation where you have a president who's demanding the aid. Mike Johnson has said basically, yes, I want this aid to go ahead. The House overwhelmingly supports the aid. But Mike Johnson needs to appease these conservatives who could oust him as speaker if they don't get what they want. But what you're seeing really is President Biden saying, I'm not going to play these games. We're not going to do any horse trading. I want a straight up or down vote. We're going to have to see whether Mike Johnson is willing to take that on at the risk of his own speakership.
That could be sooner than later from what we understand. Indeed. He promised to vote after Easter. Nick, thanks for being with us. As always, Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams. Elsewhere, both Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump taking wins in a host of primaries last night. But many voters still finding a way to push back against their party leaders. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko, who covers the White House with an eye on the campaign trail for us. Michelle, it's great to see you. The 4 states last evening included Wisconsin, which is awfully important to both of these potential paths to the White House for the Trump and Biden campaigns. And we saw pronounced protest votes against both of them. Let's start with Donald Trump. Nikki Haley pulled at least 10% in all of the states that we're talking about last night. What does that represent?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. And I think, voters would be forgiven for forgetting that yesterday was a multi-primary day. But yeah, indeed, those 4 states, resounding wins, if you can call them that, for both Biden and Trump. But really, so much of the country is exerting that sentiment that you mentioned. We had the North Texas guy last week registering as a presidential candidate under the name literally anybody else. I mean, it just really reflects how people are looking at this race with these 2 guys again. But specific to your point, in Wisconsin and other are key battleground states. I think what you're seeing that's troublesome for the Biden campaign is there are those protest votes, whether it be for blank ballots in the case of New York or as undecided in some other primaries, largely representing what you were just talking about with Nick, dissatisfaction over the Biden administration's stance on Israel, Gaza. That is a huge thorn in the side of many Democrats right now. Also, you can imagine there is some dissatisfaction around economic issues that could cause some trouble at the ballot box in November for the Biden side. But of course, not so much popularity, for Trump, who's already battling in the courts, legal courts, but also in the court of public opinion, with Nikki Haley long been out of the race. And as you say, showing a formidable challenge in that regard in double digits in all 4 primary states.
Well, Michelle, I'm glad you raised the economic issues as well that may be weighing on the minds of voters, specifically inflation and the level of interest rates as a result of the inflation that we have seen. This is something that the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, talked about earlier today at an event in California. Take a listen.
These recent data do not, however, materially change the overall picture, which continues to be one of solid growth, a strong but rebalancing labor market, and inflation moving down toward 2%. On a sometimes bumpy path.
Michelle, what was really interesting about not just Powell's remarks, but the Q&A that happened afterward is he was talking about how it wasn't just demand that was driving inflation. That is something we hear often in Washington, especially from Republicans, this idea that it was all that fiscal stimulus, trillions of dollars getting poured into the economy, and that is why we were dealing with the inflation that we were. Powell kept coming back, though, to supply side issues. And I wonder if that just kind of speaks to the messaging disconnect between what people are feeling and what the reality is and how the Biden campaign is trying to bring those two things together.
Well, I don't envy Chair Powell's role as Fed chair in an election year where, everybody's going to try to throw the political question at him. But he did give that sort of dry economic response and trying to clarify, the broad apolitical analysis on what's going on in the economy. But I think, mainly what the comfort was out of Powell's speech and remarks today at that event were that no news is good news. He largely said the Fed is going to stay the course for now. They are, of course, watching those inflation readings, especially the past 2 that showed a little bit hotter inflation than expected. But for now, it's still stay the course. At some point this year is the phrasing in terms of having an interest rate cut, but nothing to be too excited about today.